Hey, it's me. I'm eating. Well, I finished eating. Met some friends, and he's a little camera shy, so we're going to talk about banks. So tell us what you know about banks and the banking systems, how it's screwed the American people, and what is our resolve, if any.
Well, in the first place, what I started to know about banks was when I worked for the FDIC for 7 years, and that started me on a quest to understand how our banking system worked. And when I started learning about that, I figured out that not only was the banking system a banking system, but it was also the engine that drove our political system. And the banks have basically been running this country since about 1890.
1890.
At least since then. The Spanish-American War, the First World War, Second World War were all a result of the intervention of the monopoly bankers.
Monopoly Men.
Totally.
It's a good book. Yeah, go ahead.
In our political system, the Spanish-American War was designed to run Spain out of the Philippines and out of Cuba, because there were a great many natural resources in Cuba, especially sugar cane and whatnot, and they wanted to get hold of these assets because there was money in it, and we wanted a naval base in the South Pacific, so the Philippines was the ideal place to go. The First World War was a complete banker-run operation. The creation of the Federal Reserve was specifically designed to meet the financial needs of the combatants, specifically Britain and France, when they needed to borrow money from the United States in order to fight Germany.
Now, do you know about any of the backdoor deals that went on and how wars are really fought and paid for?
Oh, sure.
Can you elaborate a little bit on how wars are actually engaged in and paid for by the bank through the eyes of a bank?
Well,
why would they fund both sides, Mark?
Well, because they create debt. When you loan people money, you create debt, you create interest, you obligate the populations of the countries who are involved, and they basically pay on that debt for the rest of time, and it enslaves the population perpetually. They never get out of it. It's paid for and paid for and paid for.
I think World War II was what, over $1 trillion or quadrillion dollars, something like that, wasn't it?
I don't know
It
specifically.
was, yeah.
There's a nice book though that gives the exact numbers on the First World War, which is The World Since 1914 by Walter Consuelo Langsam. It was published by Houghton Mifflin in 1947. It's the 6th edition. It's out of print. If you can get it on eBay, get it. But he goes into he was the president of Fordham University, and he goes into absolute detail as to who was involved in the lending and the borrowing and the paying and the paying and the paying. It's interesting to note that Woodrow Wilson, the president who signed in the income tax as well as the creation of the Federal Reserve, had his campaign paid for by J.P. Morgan. His chief advisor, who was Edward Mandell House, was J.P. Morgan's advisor as well, and was on the board of directors of the Morgan Bank. House was a native of Houston, and House's father was a cotton merchant during the Civil War, and made hundreds of thousands of dollars running the blockade to sell cotton to Great Britain. House was also the chairman and the chief executive officer of the Democratic Party in the state of Texas, as well as being a Rockefeller/Morgan operative. When the British and the French and the Russians created their secret treaties, basically what happened was the French and the British thought that the war would be over in 6 weeks. And
did they really?
Yes, they did. They thought it was going to be an easy victory, and that the Russians opening a front on the eastern part of Germany would create a stress on the German army that they could not overcome. what happened was the Russians could not be resupplied by the British, and the German artillery was too much for the British and the Russian infantry, and they were chopped to pieces. The British spent millions and millions and millions of dollars on armaments. They tried to send them to Russia. They could never get them through. They lost hundreds of thousands of men on Gallipoli, trying to clear the Black Sea and the Dardanelles. It got to the point where the British and the French had expended their entire gold reserves in payment for foodstuffs and munitions bought from the United States.
Okay, so they expend all their gold reserves. They have nothing now. How do they get more money and continue fighting?
They went to J.P. Morgan. They went to Chase Bank, and they borrowed millions of dollars.
Now, why would they lend the money since they have no assets whatsoever?
Because they had the assets of the British people.
The slaves.
The slaves.
Okay, serfdom.
Serfdom. And
Okay.
the British general staff referred to their casualties as normal wastage. When millions of British troops marched into the machine guns
Cannon fodder.
of the German army. That's correct. The 116,000 American troops who were killed in the First World War were not there to make the world safe for democracy.
Nope.
They were there as collection agents for the big American money center banks to make sure that the French and the British paid off their loans.
Now, could that be, for whatever reason, could that tie in somehow to the IRS and
Oh, absolutely.
the fraud notes, the Federal Reserve notes that we have today?
Of course, because the Federal Reserve, which had been created in 1913,
Oh, wow, that's a coincidence,
just
isn't it?
months before the First World War
That's a
started.
coincidence,
It is
though.
a coincidence.
Oh.
Not unlike the income tax being created at
Oh,
the same time.
geez. Just bad timing.
Bad timing and a shock. And,
Okay.
The Federal Reserve cranked out all this money, and the British were sending their gold over. And let me give you tell you one little incident on this. The British had a steamship. It was the RMS Laurentian.
I don't remember, but go ahead.
It was a Cunard liner. It was a fast ship. It was called the Laurentic, Laurentic.
Okay,
A
Laurentian.
German U-boat sank it.
Okay.
It had gold bullion on board.
Okay, yeah, I heard
It
of
was
it.
being sent to New York to be put on deposit for loans to the British to buy munitions, which, by the way, the Lusitania was full of.
Yeah.
Yes, the Lusitania, when it was hit by the one torpedo and sank in 20 minutes, had secondary explosions from the munitions that were on board. Now, would you like to know...
That was a set-up deal. Go ahead, tell me.
Would you like to know what the British did to the Lusitania in 1952?
They raised it?
No. The British were scared that people would go diving on the Lusitania because it's in relatively shallow water, and they would find the explosives on board. So the British sent a destroyer out to the Lusitania and took hedgehog depth charges and attempted to blow it to bits.
And what happened?
Well, they didn't succeed. The ship was too well built, and even after being sunk for over 30 years, it was still able to withstand a great
shock,
many of the
concussion,
shock.
yeah.
And recently, a salvage operation was begun, and they found dud hedgehogs on the bottom next to the Lusitania, and the British to this day deny sending a destroyer out there to blow it up.
So why on earth would they really, tell me, why would they try to get rid of that ship with all the gold in there?
Well, they didn't. The Laurentic, they actually sent divers down and they
that's the
recovered
smart
the
thing to
gold.
do. That's
they
the smart
pulled
thing
that
to
bullion
do.
off the bottom of the
So
sea.
they're not totally backwards.
No, but that's why the United States was the economic power after the First World War.
Why?
Because
Why?
we had sucked all the assets out of the French and the British because they were paying
Through the
us
nose.
for their munitions that we were sending. Because
Yes.
their factories couldn't keep up. And they couldn't grow enough food to feed their soldiers.
Well, though. Who pays, say for instance, we have all these countries involved in this war.
All right?
Obviously, we were the victor.